English language teaching under the covers.
Hello and welcome back to ELT Under the Covers. Today we have an English teacher with over a decade's worth of experience in a few different countries. She's into teacher training. She's been a Cambridge speaking examiner, an ELT materials writer, and an EdTech enthusiast with a big focus on teacher development. Welcome to the show, Anita Derecskei.
Very close. Very good.
How are you?
Good, thanks. Yeah, excited.
So today we're excited to talk with you, but can you first take us all the way back to when you first started? What got you into teaching, and can you kind of give us a roadmap to where you're at now?
Sure. Okay. So I have a background in business, actually. I did my degree in international business and I have a master's in marketing. But then teaching has always been something I did as a side gig, just to earn money and help friends. And I didn't really think of it as the profession of my life. I was just doing it, as a side thing. And right after I did my international business degree, I started to work for different companies, working in marketing. And I was working for an IT company, and I really didn't understand what was going on because it was a very complex IT product that they were working on, the team that I was supporting. But there was one thing that I was better at than most of the team, is that I could speak English. And when they were complaining to me about this, I said, why don't we just start a little course, just after work, I could be teaching you. And then we had just lessons, just conversation lessons with some feedback. And then I realized I couldn't wait for my marketing work to be over so that the lessons start. So this is how it started, basically. And I had a friend at IH Budapest, and I called her because I started looking into how I could get into teaching. And I saw this thing called the CELTA, which I didn't know what that was. So I called this friend to sit down and talk about what this is. And she was the head of IH Budapest at that time, which I wasn't sure about. I wasn't sure what she actually did. And she's also a teacher trainer. She's called Anna Chiki. And she said it might be a good idea to do this course. And then I did my CELTA while I was doing my master's in marketing and working at the same time. And basically, first day of the CELTA, I thought, this is exactly what I want to do. I want to be a teacher trainer, actually, because I thought it's an amazing thing and I really enjoyed the course. And I know a lot of people find it super stressful, but I was very motivated by the whole course. So right after the CELTA, I started teaching, and I took on anything that came my way. General English, kids, business. I was teaching a politician, followed by a group of 6-year-olds in the afternoon, and all kinds of whatever came my way.
It's always the way,
yeah. Just, to find what I was interested in. Yeah. And then after about 2 years of teaching, I did my Delta, and I did module 1, 2, 3. I specialized on young learners in my Delta course, but basically I did it to be able to become a CELTA tutor. So I started working as a trainer, but also continued to teach, and then became an examiner and looked into materials writing. And so, all these things that people are normally interested in, I wanted to try everything and see what I would be good at.
That's fantastic. And it's so, I think it's the first time that we've heard someone that's got into this and they want to be a teacher trainer. That's their end goal, and what initially at least. That's really interesting. What?
Yeah, there's normally a lot of kind of incidental stuff in these stories, isn't there? Whereas and your story, Anita, actually seems quite directed. Apart from the initial thing, which was just like, oh, I was doing these classes, after work. That was kind of the incidental bit, and then everything else was directed. Whereas normally when you speak to people, it's like, yeah, then I randomly met this person, and then I ended up doing this, and
Yeah, it's kind of like someone just floating down a river and kind of following it along, and then eventually they start to swim towards a certain shore where it sounds like with you it's kind of you had a bit of taste of chocolate, then you went straight to the chocolate factory and just went through all the departments trying everything out, and but with the goal in mind that you are going to make the chocolate.
It's interesting though, because I don't think it makes one a better trainer in any way. It's just, the way they got there, but incidentally you will do a lot of other things anyway. So I think these all feed into it eventually.
Yeah. So with regards to kind of the stuff you're doing now, because I know that you do kind of you work with online teachers quite a lot now. What do you think about that? What do you think the main sort of challenges have been for teachers? One of the main things that you've learned, especially throughout the sort of pandemic, when online teaching has really become kind of a go-to, because at many times it's been the only option, and even now, it's still something that a lot more people are a lot more comfortable with than they were 2 years ago.
Well, so basically, maybe just to bring you up to date where I am right now, because this was the past, but so I was working as a self-taught tutor, but also working on different kinds of training. For example, in Budapest, we did one on teaching online about 4 years ago, which was revolutionary. Then we thought, oh, I don't know if anyone will apply. I don't know if anyone will be interested. That was, obviously before all these things happened and before the pandemic hit. And then about 4 months ago, I started working for Preply, which is an online teaching platform. And that's solely online. So, all the lessons are online. It's one-to-one classes, but now we have started group classes as well. And it's a completely different group of people, because I think the ones that I worked with before were mostly trained to teach face-to-face, and they had to transition into teaching online, whereas these people sign up to teach online classes from the get-go. So I think there's a difference there.
Could you elaborate on that? Because that's really interesting, because I actually, I taught in China for a while, and China was kind of like, I don't know about nowadays, but initially the market leaders with teaching online, especially with kids with, I'm just going to throw out brands, VIP Kids, Magic Ears, blah, 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 blah. There's so many of them, because it's such a vast country that it kind of made sense, because you couldn't always get a teacher in person to the different provinces. That's a different discussion though. So, there were lots of people teaching online and teaching in China that were never even taught in classrooms. But I'm really interested to hear if you have any thoughts on the difference between those that are kind of were born in the darkness to those that entered into it.
Whichever the light is, right?
Yeah.
Because I'm not sure. Yeah, I mean, already in initial teacher training, there are differences, because I did self-taught face-to-face and online as well. And the whole way of delivery is completely different. We don't talk about where you stand in the classroom, or not to show your back to your students, those kinds of things. Yeah. But we do talk about how to open a Google Chrome tab, because sometimes it goes to those basics. Because depending on the center, they will have different requirements of like technical knowledge that the participants will need. I think in terms of teachers who were trained face-to-face, what I've seen is that many times they felt like a step back in a way, because you're working on your methodology, meeting students' needs, you're reading research, you're applying it to your practice, and now you're back to, how do I share this worksheet? And I think for a lot of experienced teachers, this was kind of like a slap in the face, that I need to take this step back. And in a profession that I feel confident in and I'm well informed about, I need to go back to square one. As opposed to, if you're just taking yourself, everything is new. So it's a
Yeah,
different way of
just
seeing it.
just if I butt in a second, because I have kind of something I can say about that. So one of my friends works at British Council Valencia, and just when all this started out, he was I think he was the coordinator for development or something like that. And so he became the kind of go-to for sort of training these teachers on giving classes on Zoom. It was him that I found out about Zoom from, actually, because I think they were onto Zoom like pretty early on, when all this kind of came in, and he showed me it, and he showed me the breakout rooms and everything, and the things that he was showing the teachers. And he's not particularly techie himself, but he's all right. He can, he uses computers, right? But he was saying, like, for a lot of the teachers there, and these are teachers who've been teaching for 20 years, maybe longer. Some of them have written books, it's like that kind of level, where you've got, like, because, British Council Valencia has been going forever, and it's always been considered a very good place to work. So, I think the authors of English File were teachers at British Council Valencia, for example, Clive Oxendale and Christina Latham Cohen. So that's what we're talking about. But a lot of these teachers were really struggling with the online stuff. Because they've been doing it for that amount of time. They weren't even born into a digital world, really. They're the kind of the older generation. So they were really struggling with it, with all of those things. I can imagine how incredibly frustrating that would be if you could kind of consider yourself to be like a master teacher or something, and then suddenly, like, you can't even do the things that you're used to doing.
Yeah, because you're used to a standard of teaching that you provide, and a standard of methodology and all of this, and you can't be concentrating on that because you're looking at the basics, and it's incredibly frustrating, for sure.
It's strange. It's kind of like, because you're still teaching, but it's almost, you don't have a class. Well, you do have a classroom, but it's a whole different classroom. It's a whole different setting. So it's kind of having to go back and find out, well, this is what works to teach. Yeah, I'm in this new setting. So how do I rechange or rejig what I've been working face to face to have that work online? So I'm just wondering, what you found, and what your students have found as well, and other teachers that you've talked with have found, has kind of, they've been able to translate it per se to online, and stuff that they haven't. And if you have any thoughts on, maybe why that is.
I mean, what I've seen on CELTA courses, instructions seem to work much better, interestingly.
Oh,
because
really?
that's typically a pain point on a CELTA course.
Yeah.
But then when you're teaching online, you have a lot of things there to aid you. You can use your slides, you can use the chat to add things, you can just pop into a room and quickly send a message there. Those kinds of things seem to work better in the CELTA courses that I've worked on, but maybe, it's just a group of
Is that because it's
trainees
kind of
that
like a little bit more chunked down, or is it because there's like more different varieties of inputs that you can communicate in the instructions?
I think it's both, and also the materials or the tech tools that you have available. Like, a lot of teachers would be using PowerPoint or something like this. And when you're planning it, you will be putting your instructions there, and you will be thinking more about how to deliver it. So the lessons I've seen seem to have more structure,
And I guess you can kind
surprisingly,
of
because I thought it would be the
push
other
the
way around.
students and teachers around, I guess, because you can't, in face to face, you can't just literally grab a teacher and go, okay, you go into this group. But in Zoom, that you can just go boom, 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 break out.
Yeah.
Well, and it's kind of easier to remedy things too. If you do make a mistake, then I think once you get the confidence of using Zoom or other platforms, it's easier to act on these things.
Yeah, I mean, I've found it, because I've been teaching online. I found it to be incredibly flexible like really flexible. And I really feel like I have a lot of options while I'm teaching, you know, so I can very quickly go, right, okay, well, you know, this is kind of going well. Let's expand a bit on that. And then I can share my screen and very quickly, like, you know, you sort of totally take over like the, you know, the visual sphere of that student, don't you? Suddenly go, boom, this is what we're looking at now. Look at this picture, you know. So there's a lot of, I've actually found it very flexible, and that you can be a lot more sort of dynamic in your teaching. You know, we don't have to worry about, for example, preparing the handouts. There are no handouts, you know, that kind of thing. So, and you can have lots of things kind of ready to go. You know, I mean, my whole bank of lessons is there, you know. So if I suddenly go like, oh, you know, it seems like we've kind of gone off piste a little bit on this topic and we're kind of going into that, well, I could just flip over to it. And I've actually done that a few times where it just seems to make sense to go onto this other thing, because this is where the interest is, and this is what's going well, and it's going to be more beneficial to the students. And you know, in a typical classroom, it can be a lot more difficult to do that.
You're starting to talk like dogma there, Rich. What's going on here?
Yeah, I guess there's a bit. I don't know. Well, it's not really in the philosophy of dogma, is it? Because dogma is supposed to be like minimal, like using minimal resources, where I'm actually using a whole load of resources, but you kind of have them available so easily with the technology. Just as a disclaimer, though, I don't do group classes, so I imagine that group classes would be a different dynamic. I mean, part of it is the fact that with a one-to-one, you can be so customized, and you know, you can do things specially for that student. Whereas if you have a group class, you have to consider the whole class. So it's going to be less likely that you're going to sort of do these major pivots, I suppose.
You can also kind of take a step back from time to time. I really like that about teaching online, you know, that let's say what you said, like I want to find something extra, or I was asked something tricky, a word that I didn't know or something like that. I can quickly look it up.
Yeah.
Those kinds of things, or a better way of explaining something. You can take a step back, turn your camera off from time to time. That doesn't really happen in a classroom because you feel like all eyes are on you anyway. Even if it's a one-to-one, I would sometimes tell them to do something for a second, you know.
Yeah.
While I look for something.
While you cry.
Yeah, totally.
Like,
no, but that makes
my fifth lesson today.
That makes perfect sense. And that is something that I used to do in the physical classroom as well, which is if the students are on task and I want to look something up, then I can jump to the computer. But it is much more flexible online because you're already at the computer, whereas in a class you have to kind of go to your computer and like maybe sit down or type standing up or whatever. And, you know, it kind of seems like you're no longer involved in the class. You're kind of doing some other teacher thing, right? Whereas, yeah, with the online class, I suppose it doesn't interfere with the flow so much because, you know, the expectation is already this. So yeah, I can certainly see how that would work. Something that would interest me then is because you spoke about people who have transitioned into online teachers, but then there's these people who've kind of always been online teachers or are perhaps a bit more tech savvy. You know, this is their world. You know, what I would be interested in are kind of the maybe unique or like unexpected things you've seen, kind of that more sort of tech comfortable crowd do, that have sort of stood out as, oh, that's an interesting thing, or, you know, I wouldn't have thought of that.
I would say the first thing that comes to mind is just the range of tools and the range of different ways of doing the same thing that we've seen. And sometimes I feel like it goes to the other extreme because I'm not sure we need 20 different tools for an interactive whiteboard or something like that. So I think sometimes we just use tech for the sake of tech.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And
like
we don't really think
gamification or something. It just ends up, the point becomes to play the game rather than to, you know,
Exactly.
communicate or learn. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think I think this will be the next step actually, because now that we have started using all these tools and everyone's posting about them and writing blog posts and videos and podcasts and all these things, then we can kind of, once things settle down a little bit, we can think about what actually enhances the language learning process. And
do you have any thoughts on that right now? Any inclinations? You're like, oh, I think I'm going to keep my eye on this. Or do you not want to give it away because you're going to sell it?
I think what I'm really into now, and it came to me through teaching online and working online a lot, is creating more responsive materials and more interactive digital materials. I'm thinking about starting a blog actually with, just the interactive materials. I really like Genially. I don't know if you have used it.
I'm not familiar with it. Can you kind of give us a rundown?
It's basically a presentation tool. You create an interactive presentation. You can make it clickable. There can be, like windows opening up, one page leading to another. There's also a group of French teachers who have started coding it, and then it's really, really cool. You can like drag and drop things and things can be happening. You can even create like an escape room kind of thing. But what is great about it and what I really like is that you can embed things into Genially. So I was working on a project here for the La Universidad Politécnica in Catalonia, and we were creating materials based on TED Talks, and then we would have the TED Talk embedded, and then a task coming from it, and then a Quizlet set included, and all kinds of things can be embedded into a Genially. And I would spend hours and hours and hours preparing those materials. But then in the lesson, there is not much work left for the teacher.
Yeah.
Because it's really nice because you can see people interacting with those things, the questions that come up, and that then you can really do reactive teaching, as opposed to here's what I prepared for you. Let's talk about that.
Right.
It's really interesting this because I've been doing a lot of research recently about lecturing. We this it just won't go away. I mean, there are benefits to it, but when you go to and I'm moving outside of ELT right now. When you go to big universities, Cambridge, Harvard, and you've got these Richard Feynmans and all these esteemed people, when they're teaching, they're just lecturing. They can be doing this over video, so there's none of that reactive element to that. And there was I can't remember his name now, a German lecturer. I think he was. I don't know if he was German or he just had a German name, but he taught physics, and he actually would have students have clickers. And he would do polls as they were going through the materials, and they would click to see if they understood or not. And then he would have like a feedback in front of him, and he could see, oh, okay, a majority of the class aren't picking up on this yet, so I'm gonna lean into that a little bit more. And there's more to it, and if I remember his name, I'll send you a message with what he was doing. But it very much reminded me of that. And it feels like an opportunity for us to revolutionize lecturing, to be, as you say, as you just explained.
Yeah, we've sort of spoke about this, haven't we?
It's my current obsession.
Lecturers just lean heavily into the fact that they are the experts, and therefore everyone should be hanging on to their every word.
But we know that's not how learning works, right?
Well, yeah, it's true. Yeah, it's the theatre of chalk and talk, isn't it? And just to drop in a relevant thing, I did a MOOC, massive online. I don't know what the other O stands for. Course in about 2013 on Coursera, when that was very big, by a guy called Dan O'Reilly. He's an economics professor, actually, and the course was called Irrational Behavior. And he employed so many pedagogical techniques that I've not seen other university lecturers employ. He would actually ask sort of, schemata activating questions, and he would have a reflection, and he would, in this course, you would have to sort of answer a question and type your answer in before it let you watch the next part of the video. So there's all these kind of interactive elements, and it was like a million times better than just sitting in a lecture theatre and listening to someone for 60 minutes.
I often think about this actually, all the things that we know about learning and more English teachers seem to be using. Why doesn't it translate to other subjects or sometimes even other languages? Because now I get to see a lot of other teachers, because Preply isn't only for English teachers, it's all kind of teachers, but also non-language teachers. But also when I was at university and I was already doing my CELTA and Delta and going to a corporate marketing session and thinking, oh, this is not how people learn. Why are you teaching me like this? And, but universities don't always seem to have, for example, what we had at IH Budapest when I started straight after my CELTA, everyone had a mentor there. We all had lesson observations. We all had feedback. I don't know how much of this is happening in other kinds of institutions. I have a hunch, but I don't think it's a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's always kind of seemed to me that there's a lot of research that's gone into language teaching, particularly teaching English as a foreign language, and it's almost like the demands placed on language teachers are actually quite high. And I think language teachers are relatively skilled in teaching as a whole. And it's kind of funny, really, because you've got people who sometimes are referred to as real teachers. But actually, in many ways, I think that the kind of educational practices that a lot of these real teachers use are actually inferior. And I think it's just the fact that because language teaching still has kind of this reputation of like a backpacker industry, which there are a lot of backpacker language teachers out there. There always have been. So that's why it kind of has that reputation. But I think it's unfortunate. And I know quite a lot of people actually who've done a PGCE. That's the UK qualification, which allows you to be a primary or secondary teacher, and have done either a Trinity diploma or a Delta, and they all say that the diploma is far more comprehensive than a PGCE. So I haven't heard anyone who's done both of those say that the PGCE was more challenging or more comprehensive or more kind of in depth in terms of education. So that seems a bit odd, doesn't it? That that our sort of standard for language teachers, in a way, is kind of higher than our standard for people who teach other subjects.
I think in a way it's just my theory, but I think it's got to do with everyone thinking they are language experts. Like the minute you start learning a language, you become a language expert and you know exactly how language learning happens. We all have Duolingo on our phones. We all encounter ways of learning languages, and therefore we think we know it all. And I wouldn't claim I'm an expert on learning maths, even though I've taken 4 years of maths at uni. Right. So I think it's more of a part of our life. And it's a bit like, when you're learning to drive and all your family gives their comments and tells you how to drive, because it's part of everyone's lives in a way, languages.
I think you're making a good point there, actually. If you want to be a physics teacher, for example, the expectation is that you have a degree in physics. But the vast majority of language teachers definitely are not expected to have a degree in English unless it's a specific country-based thing with a visa. So there is something there. Again, it's kind of this thing where the higher the requirement of expertise of the teacher, or the perceived requirement of a higher expertise of the teacher, seems to lead to maybe less focus on the actual classroom and the learning. And I guess that, again, that's what we see with professors at university, isn't it? They are, for example, one of the most knowledgeable people in the world in that subject, and therefore you're going to listen to what they say. They don't have to do cutouts and dance around and get people interacting or whatever.
because that's your job. Your job is to take notes and learn, and it's not put on the teacher as an extra burden to be
So
teaching you.
it might almost be like kind of a supply and demand thing. Yeah, but I definitely think it's a shame, and I think one of the aims of this podcast is really to find more of a way of uniting the sort of pedagogical practices of language teaching with general education.
Well, it's not just
And
a shame, in my opinion. It's a barrier. For many people, they I mean, generally the way the public education is set up, it works for a certain subset of learners that, do well with just being taught to and taking notes. But, those that maybe aren't that more inclined, I know it's been debunked, but, stuff like, if we think about in terms of like the visual, auditory, or kinesthetic. I know that's kind of like a bit wishy-washy nowadays, but someone that's a little bit less auditory inclined to just listening to people, to more visual, that needs to see pictures, or kinesthetic, in that they need to kind of move around and actually employ their body while learning. It doesn't work for them. So when Anita talks about something like Genially, especially if it's visual, it opens and makes it easier for a lot more learners to actually grasp materials, not just English learning, but like imagine if you're doing this with physics or maths, and you can see visual representations as the lecturer is going through, or actually something a little bit more active. It's going to make it easier for more people to learn this. So it's not going to be as but sometimes it comes across to me as elitist.
Yeah, that's what I like about Genially, and something I've been experimenting with is doing the same thing, like the same unit or topic or whatever we're focusing on, or exam task, and giving alternatives for the student within the Genially presentation. So I put you into breakout rooms, and because this was used for groups, but I think it could totally work in one-on-one classes as well. And you choose the way you want to look at it, and you choose the way you will interact with the material. I will be here, I'll be helping out, but it's your learning journey, because I'm really interested in learner autonomy, and I think this is something that most teachers should be looking into, especially with languages, because the ultimate goal is for students to go out in the world and be able to communicate without you being around. And if you constantly spoon feed everything to them, how is that going to happen?
I've actually got two questions related to that. One is, how do you approach this? How do you design a lesson to kind of fulfill more learner autonomy, especially when you're doing this online? Like, what's your approach? If you could give us kind of your thinking and steps, when you've designed this lesson, like the one that you mentioned. And two is, what's the role for the teacher after that? If you've developed a lesson that a learner can just learn without a teacher, then do we need a teacher, and what's the future with that?
I think we do. If you don't mind, I answer the second one first.
Sure.
So yeah, I mean, it's not without the teacher, it's giving a thinking framework to the student and being there to guide them. I don't think we will ever be out of work. I know a lot of teachers think we do, because we're teaching communication, and how do you communicate without a person being there? So, I think there are amazing apps and softwares and all kinds of things. And I'm really into this too. Like I really enjoy looking into instructional design as well as UX design and all kinds of things. But I don't think we will ever be out of work, just because of the social element of learning. And maybe we need to rethink our roles as opposed to the former, the source of all knowledge role. Right. It might be a facilitator role, which is, I know it's overused, the term facilitator, but I do think that this is what we will be focusing on.
I mean, one of the things that I've focused on personally, for better or worse, I mean, it certainly works in terms of the students kind of enjoying the classes, is focusing really on engagement as a maximal thing. So it's really, I try and make lessons as interesting and as engaging as possible. I try and to use materials that you know, the students kind of learn something other than just language. And I know, you know, it's kind of, I suppose it's kind of pseudo CLIL. It's not like real CLIL, but it's kind of pseudo CLIL. It's kind of like, well, me and the student might not know a great deal about, you know, psychometric testing and psychology, but let's do a bit of a class on it together and sort of have this communicative experience. And personally, I've found that works very well. But it's, you know, it's sort of, it's one style, and I can see how there might be objections to it. Maybe it's, you know, not quite focused enough on the language, and maybe it's sort of you know, dangling a carrot, which is not really the right kind of carrot or whatever. You know, I don't know.
But doesn't
anyway,
it,
yeah.
sorry, doesn't it mirror real life communication? I mean, a conversation will be something you know, and I don't, and then we talk about it, and then, you know, those kinds of things. So
Yeah,
I think
I mean,
it's the best way to mirror real life communication.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think, well, I think anything it does is always going to be, yeah, so you can always justify it as being an authentic communication. Yeah, and I mean, that's Jamie Keddy's thing, isn't it? The storytelling, and how storytelling is a big part of learning and communication. So his whole kind of pedagogy is based around stories and making stories interactive, and that's really his style, and that sort of works. But that's also hinged on this idea of engagement. I think engagement is a key thing of learning. I don't think anyone would sort of dispute that. So for me, anything that increases students' ability to engage and also increases the students' level of interest in whatever you're teaching is really a priority, I think. And I took a quick look at the tool we mentioned before. What was it called again? Genially. Yeah, and you know, instantly it looked interesting to me. You know, it kind of drew me in, and just looking at the website and looking at the examples here at the bottom, they look great. You know, and there's something to be said for that. You know, just the fact that, you know, I'm getting this interest now. I think that's a good barometer of how a student would feel seeing it. You know. So you know, that's my kind of thing anyway. That's my approach at the moment. And as you say, I think there always will be a role for the teacher, even if we get to the stage of, you know, this stage that kind of communicative language teachers have nightmares about, where we sort of have you know, Google Translate in our ear, or completely automated instructional design things, like I guess kind of like Duolingo, but imagine it in 30 years time, how that might go. Do we still need a teacher? And I think there'll always still be a place for a teacher, because there is something kind of special about an interaction with another person. I don't know if you're into science fiction at all, but I'm a big fan of Ian M. Banks, the science fiction writer, and he used to write about utopian futures where society is basically run by these kind of super intelligent artificial intelligences, and drones do all of the work, and sort of humans are just kind of left to kind of do whatever they want, really. But humans still spend a lot of time interacting with each other, even though, you know, technology is so high that you could theoretically fulfill all the requirements of learning and interaction and everything synthetically, but that's not really what people want, even if it doesn't seem to have meaning beyond the meaning of just a social interaction. There's still some desire for that. And yeah, it's part of us, isn't it? It's almost an innate quality. And I've drank too much Diet Coke and sort of gone off on some wild rant.
No, I think it's a very good point. And even if the day comes when we will have chips inserted into our ears, continuously translating things, then teachers will be there, language teachers will be there to teach you what to say in certain situations, or how to interact with in a business situation with a friend, those kinds of things. I think will always have a place
Yeah,
to work.
I like the. I know you said it's an overused term, but I do like the term facilitator. I'd even hazard to say like a guide, in that you're kind of, I guess, you're going to be there and they're going to be interacting with material, but also you're going to be kind of like almost, I guess, more of an observation role. In you're like, I can kind of see where they're thinking about it in this way, but maybe they need to shift their thinking and think about this particular thing in an opposite way, like for example, or maybe they're spending too much time trying to get the perfect grammar when they should be focused on chunking a sentence or a phrase together, because that's what we use anyway. So the idea, it's almost kind of like you're more of a sculptor rather than someone that's kind of trying to teach something, whereas before the online in person, you're trying to teach a language point, but you're also trying to kind of maneuver the student into the right position that they're going to use it correctly or think about it in the correct way. So I can see elements of psychology in there as well.
This is the reason why the very first lesson in each course is my favorite thing, because I always do like an opinion dictation thing, which basically I just dictate sentences. Like I want my teacher to correct every single mistake I make. And then the students have to reconstruct it. So there's a language element to it from words, but then say their opinion. And I think this is really nice because we can talk about their beliefs when it comes to language teaching and my beliefs, and then see if we are a match and what the course should be like.
Interesting. Yeah, I've researched a little bit of Preply, and I noticed that there's like an algorithm for matching. I kind of think of it. I mean, am I kind of wrong with that, or no?
No, there is one.
It's like a Tinder for tutors. Or it sounds terrible, but it makes sense because we don't always. We do the same in real life. Am I a teacher that will fit to you? So when you bring that up, I'm like, oh, that's interesting. So it's actually baked into the cake.
Yeah, I think what is tricky at the moment is, we can see these things, but mostly the more measurable or more tangible aspects, like when is a teacher free? What levels do they teach? What other languages they speak that can help them? Those kinds of things. But really the intangible elements of teaching, which really matter to me, those are not there yet. We don't know how to, because I don't know what your beliefs are as a student about learning.
Well, often
and my beliefs, and
they
then
don't know
how
as
we
well,
meet
right?
each other. Exactly. Yeah.
You say, oh, I want someone that corrects me all the time, and then they're just like, why are you correcting me all the time?
Exactly.
Because people don't know what they want often, so it's interesting with that regard. So maybe there'll be more kind of integration of psychology in these matching algorithms at some point. Maybe doing some sort of big 5 tests, or Myers and Briggs or something like that, and see if you can match up personalities.
That's an interesting point. Yeah, I might forward it.
I've always found this kind of the sort of hidden dangers in sort of the intuitive things, or the things that a student thinks that they intuitively want from teaching. So a lot of students will actually come with this idea that they want correction all the time, but the thing is they perhaps don't realize the negative effects that might have, such as impeding their fluency. I mean, if you have kind of constant on the spot correction, particularly in say a one-to-one class, then it's going to be a very synthetic kind of conversation, which is not particularly good practice for a real world conversation. And that isn't necessarily that obvious to students at first. And maybe it's the kind of thing that they might notice after having 5 years of classes where they're where they're getting everything corrected, and they suddenly realize, hang on a minute, I've got piles and piles and piles and piles of notes about corrections, and I'm finding it difficult to string a conversation together because I'm constantly sort of monitoring every word and thinking about these corrections, and that's the kind of style of sort of education that they've had. And I think that's where the teacher's expertise has to come in when it comes to the course. I always see it as kind of a negotiation, and I don't know if you find this, that you're kind of constantly convincing your students of, of sort of certain things about language, and then you can sort of see when the penny drops and they go, oh yeah, you're right, this is a better way of doing it, okay, let's do that.
It's tricky though, because we do have strong beliefs as teachers as well about language learning, but then what if the student questions them? Like, are we also willing to question our beliefs and make changes? For example, I had a Spanish teacher online, and she was really highly qualified, and we had great lessons, but she constantly corrected whatever I said, like all these things, the small things, when it was a fluency focused task, and I really didn't want her to. So we had this conversation, because I'm the kind of student who will speak up and talk about, actually, I think we should do, but most students won't be like that, obviously.
Yeah.
So I told her, why not do some delayed error correction or more focused way of error correction? And she said, yes, let's do it. And in a couple of lessons, she reverted back to her habit, because that's how she'd been teaching for 20 or so years.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
So that's tricky too. And, as research comes out and we learn about ways that we might not have been doing the best way, do we change? Are we willing to change our practices?
Yeah, and I think one of the, going all the way back, one of the the issues with a lot of face-to-face teachers moving online is they're kind of being presented with this black mirror, this of their own practice, because they have to look at what my practice in the classroom, now I've put that online, what have I been doing is what I've been doing in the classroom not the best practice, because it doesn't translate online? Is it because I'm not teaching well? Or you really have to start kind of peeling back the onion and to be, well, why did this work in the classroom? And because I know I'm doing the same activity in the class, but I try it online, it doesn't work online, but it's the same material. So why is that? So I feel like a lot of teachers have gone through a phase of forced reflection on their teaching when moving online. I don't know if you could speak to that, or have had a similar experience, or teachers with that.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, even just the fact that a lot of lessons are recorded on Zoom.
Yeah.
For example, I have worked for some schools where they wanted the lessons to be recorded if a student misses a class or something. And then you inevitably look at a part of your lesson or the whole lesson and realize, oh, it's not how I imagined it, or maybe they are not as engaged as I thought they would be.
Yeah.
With, as you said, and it might be something that worked perfectly well in a face-to-face classroom. I'm really looking forward to finding out in a couple of years' time what we find out about language learning online. Like, do people learn languages differently online? Are the cognitive processes different in any way? But I guess we'll have to wait like 5-10 years for that, or I don't know.
Yeah, right. That will be very interesting. I mean, the whole thing is going to be, I suppose, affected by the fact that it's not just language teaching that's taken off online, it's everything. And I guess we sort of wonder whether, I mean, it's not going to go away, is it? Online communication is now going to be part of social interaction for people forever. I think we've spoke before, Neil, haven't we, about how it might kind of move into sort of a VR. Well, it's definitely going to move into VR at some point. I think that'll be sort of interesting, because then it brings it back to a kind of more of a face-to-face style element, even if it's generated. So Yeah, it will be particularly interesting. I have an interesting specific situation at the moment where I have these two students, a couple that I've been teaching for kind of a long time. I taught them for a few years in Spain years ago, and then recently we've started up our classes again about 6 months ago online, and it's interesting because honestly, the classes feel very similar, and that sort of surprises me. And it is interesting the fact that I can compare those specific students because I know them quite well, and I taught them for a long time face to face, and now I've been teaching them for about 6 months online, and yeah, the classes, the interactions that we have do feel very similar. There are obviously differences, but it's more similar than I would have thought, I suppose.
It's interesting also because I sometimes wonder whether what we actually teach will change as well, because we're teaching communication, but then people communicate online. Like, as an example, the other day I was teaching a class on back channeling and, all these expressions that we use. And then I thought about this and thought about how much I back channel online and all the things I would normally do if we were sitting in a cafe going, interesting, tell me more, that kind of thing. We just don't do it online because we interrupt each other and then the sound cuts out and all these kinds of things. So even if you have similar classes, will the language be different or the ways of communication will be different? Or maybe it's just an isolated case. And
Well, I think there's, it's likely that there's going to be, just in the same way as harkening back to when you're talking about the CELTA and, telling students, teachers to how to position themselves in the classroom, whereas as a society, I feel like we're establishing new sets of social etiquette and rules for online, and we will still be having to do that when we're going into the VR world as well. So I actually think there's going to be new, I'm not even say elements of English, but maybe just online communication with like memes, GIFs, all these sort of things, because they're almost idiomatic if you think about it. I was thinking about this the other day. Like, if I show you, I'm trying to think of a popular meme that's like super famous or something.
I think
like
I know
that.
what you
like if I talk about that meme of
Hide the Pain Herald.
Yeah, Hide the Pain Herald, or like any of the Leonardo DiCaprio ones. It might be more for everyone watching to understand, like where he's chinking a glass or he's kind of like laughing away. You don't need to know who he is. You don't need to know what movie that's from. You just kind of get the understanding from either the background that you've dealt with that meme, or kind of often memes are self-explanatory. I see it in the same way as idioms. When I talk about piece of cake, I don't teach people where piece of cake came from. I teach the meaning, and often it's self-explanatory. I see memes in the same way as they're online idioms in a way, but this is still thoughts that I'm formulating. But I think a lot of online is going to be that way. There's going to be new forms of communication, a new language that we're also having to deal with on top of what other language we're communicating in as well. So it's interesting moving forward.
Super interesting. Yeah, that's why I don't think we will be out of jobs, because there will be things changing like this and new ways of communicating.
Yeah. Hello and welcome back to meme language teaching under the covers.
Yeah, I mean, that point you made about back channeling was quite interesting, because there is definitely a divergence of approaches on that. And you notice it actually when you're in a conversation with someone, particularly one-to-one, that some people will do it quite a lot and some people don't do it at all when it's online. And there's definitely going to be a direction taken, I think, and a precedent set. And it's probably going to be towards, as I think you were implying, it's probably going to be towards like not doing it online So we don't do this kind of when you're listening to someone online, because it's just sort of like, for example, neither of you are doing it right now. But some of my students do it, and I think I do it quite a bit as well. But it might well be that the way things are going is that it's not going to happen, and that again, that's sort of an evolution of conversation in a way, because in real life, it's sort of important to do it to show that you're listening.
But then it works both ways, doesn't it? Because once I had a one-on-one student and I was teaching him about back channeling, and then he said, so should I be doing this to my wife as well? So, like, I think what we do here also has an effect on how people communicate outside the classroom, and even maybe not even in English. And I think that's one of the beauties of language teaching, or CCQs with trainees. We were talking about concept checking and instruction checking. And then one of my trainees told me that the other day he was talking to his son. And then he said, so who's taking out the trash today? Is it you or is it me? So there are ways to check understanding other kinds of communication as well, not only language teaching.
It's interesting as well, because, with my teaching experience, especially with language teaching experience, I have a young son right now, and I actually have Team Teacher Baby, my own YouTube channel where we kind of film our adventures, but also we're accumulating footage and filming of him learning to speak and communicate, and a lot of these pedagogical techniques and my experience that we've talked about, I use that with kids, but I'm more aware of it as well. So how I'm interacting with him, I don't think it would be different if I knew about teaching or not, but with the teaching, I know I'm aware of it, and I know, well, it might actually be better if I did it this way, or like you mentioned CCQs, and I do that all the time. I mean he's only 2 years old, but a lot of repetition and giving options, this one or that one, less open as you build up the language, it makes sense. So for me, that really emboldens me with the stuff that we teach and we explore, especially with English language teaching and the pedagogy around that, because it seems to fit with how we learn a language, but just how we learn as I'm observing, my young one grow up. It seems to be of all the kind of teaching techniques that I've kind of like explored, it seems to match and mirror that the most.
Super interesting. Such a cool project.
Yeah.
What have you learned so far that you didn't know about how languages are learned?
No, I mean, like it's from the knowledge that I've acquired, like from doing the CELTA and from teaching and talking with people like yourselves. I take snippets and, I will use that, and also you kind of research into Piaget and Erikson, and you start to kind of build up this idea of, well, what do you need to do first? For example, one of the things that I encountered straight off was there's so much of a push for even babies that have toys that have like ABCs or numbers on or something like that. When they're babies, you're trying to like teach them the ABCs from baby. Why are you even doing that? When if you start thinking about it from what they need first, scaffolding wise, it makes sense when Piaget says you need to focus on sensory motor improvement. Then that makes sense more, because their senses are still developing. They're still trying to get their motor skills going. So you want to be doing activities that, get them moving around, or expose them to different sensory inputs, rather than just, trying to teach language, because they don't have a foundation for that. So I find that that's very much similar to when you're teaching English. You kind of have to see where they are at with their levels, and then go, okay, what do I need to teach now to be able to get them to what I want to teach next, you know? But it's on a whole human level, a whole child level.
I think this is going to be very tricky for young learner teachers online, because all of these extra skills that we would include, like motor skills, sensory skills, just getting students to move around, jump up, do, I don't know, head and shoulders, knees and toes, is just tricky online. So I that's another thing I will be interested in, you know, how it unfolds in the next couple of years. Kids learning languages from scratch now, will they be better or as good at languages or not as good? Or, you know, how is this going to evolve? It's
Yeah.
very interesting.
I think it's going to be probably a bit better, because there's, especially with the young ones, like I'm talking really young, you know, like toddlers, you're going to need the caregiver there with you. Whereas in a kindergarten, the kids just get put in the class with the teacher, maybe a support teacher, something like that. But if you're teaching a kindergartner online, then the caregiver is going to have to be there with them. Now, one of the principles of, if you have an educational toy, is what makes it educational, that is that it prompts interaction with the caregiver. So when we are watching, if you're going to watch YouTube, if you put your kid in front of YouTube, that's not educational. But if you are watching YouTube with the child and you're kind of interacting with the screen, and you'll say, oh, I see this is going here, and that, then you actually get more interaction. So by an extension, if you have the caregiver with the child as you're teaching, then, you know, the caregiver at some point is probably going to have some sort of relationship with the teacher during the class. And that's going to, based on the theory, should enhance the educational experience.
But then we will have to talk to caregivers and
Yeah,
adjust their
yeah.
expectations as well, because it's also the digital babysitter
Yeah.
oftentimes. And, you know, I'm just going to put the kid in front of the computer. So it's tricky.
But the younger you get,
that's one of
the more you
part.
can't do that. That's the thing.
Of course. Yeah.
So, sorry, I'm going on a rich rant right now.
No, it's interesting.
So, one thing that we didn't touch on, we talked about how great is this online world. You know, we've got all these tools and everything seems really shiny. What are the negatives that you found, especially with, you know, these new teachers that have solely been online, and, you know, also teachers that have gone face to face to online? What are some of the negatives that you found, and can you kind of expand on that?
I think it's lonelier for sure. I mean, especially if you're a freelancer and you don't belong to a certain organization. We see that a lot as well. For example, at Preply, because what I do at Preply is basically we do webinars as well as self-study courses for teachers, methodology courses, but also user training. And then once we get teachers together in a room, you can see people just saying, oh, now I have colleagues. Because, you know, usually the beauty is that you can work from anywhere. And even if you live in a rural place, that you might not be able to access other professionals. But then we don't have the teacher's room where you just go and, I don't know, complain about a tricky student you had, or just ask a question like, guys, I had this problem, what would you do? That kind of thing. Or, you know, just talk about anything really.
Yeah, where's the downtime, right?
Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
Yeah, I completely agree with this idea of a disconnect from colleagues. And actually, I think that was one of the reasons why I wanted to start this with you originally, Neil, back at the start, was kind of having some sort of connection to the English teaching world and being able to speak to teachers and stuff like that. You know, I work for through a private platform for giving my teachers online. And there's just a handful of teachers who work for the platform, It's interview based. It's gated, so it's not kind of like anyone gets in. They have requirements for the teaching qualifications and so on. And there's some really interesting people on there, but my interactions with them have been very tangential. So, an email here about XYZ student who, for one reason or another, has transferred to me or transferred to them. The very, very occasional kind of Zoom meeting where we're doing a bit of like audio recording work and someone wants to record a dialogue and that kind of stuff, but it is quite refreshing when you get it, because you're suddenly like, oh, I'm talking to these people who I work with, who actually I barely have any interaction with and barely even know, but they are my colleagues, and we do share students sometimes, one might come to me and say, oh yeah, I had some classes with blah 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 and it was really interesting, they were very good at this. And it's like, when I first went online, I really had no idea what other teachers were doing compared to what I was doing. I had no clue at all. So it was, and I kind of found my own way with it. But, I really had no idea of how similar it was to what other people are doing. And I still only have a kind of a limited understanding of that. I can only make assumptions about what a lot of teachers are doing, really.
It's a pity, because I think the best ideas come through talking to other professionals, and those coffee machine conversations were really the things that started things for me as well. When it comes to teacher training, but also just lesson ideas or ways to solve a problem. Because even if we do have Zoom conversations like this, for example, we do focus on one specific thing in general, like what you said, like recording something for a material, and it's hard for the conversation to go into something creative or something new. That's definitely a downside.
Have you found a way around that, or if you found a way to recreate you being in the teacher lounge and you're kind of like scribbling away and someone looks over your shoulder and be like, oh, what you're working on there? Oh, I did something like that. Have you tried this? Have you found any way to kind of recreate that?
The only thing I have found is connected with conferences or other, professional development events. That what I started doing with a colleague is that she's my conference buddy. And we would go to a conference like Innovate or ITAF or any of these conferences. And we would go to separate sessions and then meet up after with a bottle of wine or something and talk about what we've heard, what thoughts we had. And because that's another thing I really miss. Like I really liked going to conferences when they were face to face because of the coffee conversations. And now it's different, right? There's no one to reflect to and tell them what thoughts you had, what questions you had. So I think having a professional development buddy really helps. I think this could be something I've been having thoughts, like maybe we should build a community for people just to catch up and say, is anyone free tomorrow at 3? I want to vent about something connected to teaching. Like I wish that was a possibility, right? Just for people to be matched and be able to talk.
Yeah, no, I love that idea of some sort of arena. I don't want to say arena, it makes it sound like gladiatorial, but some sort of place, a gathering place where people go, and maybe it's kind of like a conference where there's something that is presented that's a starting off point that people can break out of and go, oh, I'm listening to this conversation or listening to that, and then I'll join that and flick between them and try and recreate that. I'm not sure it's quite there yet, but it's something to keep an eye out for.
I think the fact that it can't be as impromptu really kind of presents a barrier in a way, doesn't it? Because it's kind of like, like you're saying, Anita, it's like maybe Friday when the last class finishes, the teachers will say, oh, let's go and have a caña at the local taberna or whatever and sit down and have a chat. And then maybe the conversation gets on teaching, you start talking about some things, makes you think about it, you reflect, it's kind of this informal professional development, isn't it? But then if you try to do that online and you're like, okay, everyone, we've sort of finished our classes for the day, here's the Zoom call at 4:00 where we're going to like talk about teaching and stuff. Suddenly, it becomes like, well, 4 o'clock, actually, I'm doing this other thing, or, it doesn't quite have the same thing, does it? So being able to, to bring back that kind of casual, as we were saying, sort of teacher room talk, it would be nice. How to
It's
do it
hard
is
though. Yeah.
difficult. Yeah.
Because not casual might not work for everyone either. I have a friend who's very introverted. She's an English teacher, and she went to, for example, Innovate, where they put when you go to the Zoom coffee room or breakout room, or I don't know what it was called, the coffee session, they match you with a random person to have a
Oh,
conversation. And I thought, oof, I'm not sure if I'm ready for that. She had gone to the face-to-face one before, didn't talk to anyone. On Zoom, she was thriving because she didn't have this barrier of approaching someone, starting a conversation. So for some people, it might work even better. She really enjoyed it. She said, okay, I was put together with even, a big name in ELT, but because we are in the same room, we are going to talk. But I never would have approached them in the garden.
yeah,
Yeah,
we've got this whole
that is
new world.
interesting. Well, that kind of goes back to what you were saying before, Neil, about how with online we do have the ability to just go, right, put that person with that person, boom, and now they're off in their own thing, which, yeah, I think is sort of fascinating. Because I don't teach group classes, then I haven't kind of played around with that, but I do like that idea, and it is something that, excuse me, it is something that with VR and things like that could become even more interesting, right? And as you say, for people who might struggle in a loud, noisy, extroverted style conference where, people are having these kind of conversations, suddenly it enables them to feel more comfortable with the communication. So that is very interesting.
Yeah, there's my wife works in events and marketing, and she's a former teacher. Or she still does. She would still do teaching, I think, if she had time online. But she uses they have a program called Verbella, and it's kind of VR, but it's not. You have an avatar in an office or in a conference room, and you kind of move around. But one of the interesting features that I saw her use is the closer you get to an avatar, the louder they become. So you can kind of hear their conversations as you're moving around the conference room. So you'll see all these avatars gathering together, just looking like they've frozen in a specific part of the conference room, and that's because someone's talking, or they're all trying to talk in a group. So there are people working on this, and there's different ways of approaching it. But I kind of want to talk more about the negative.
Okay.
I'm like that. I focus on I'm just a pessimistic person. What more? Is there any other negatives that you've come across, or?
Well, health risks for sure. I mean, Zoom
Yeah.
fatigue and all these things that come with it. Like for example, when I'm teaching on Zoom, I always turn my camera off. I mean, the student can see my camera, but I hide my camera because I've read about this. I think it was Stanford who published this article that, your brain is not designed to be seeing yourself. Like if you were sitting in a cafe and
I
there was
see.
a mirror
Yeah.
behind
Yeah.
you, I would feel strange. And why do we put ourselves into this situation?
Yeah.
So I think we need to think about a lot of these small tweaks that we
Yeah.
can do, like hiding your camera, positioning yourself, how you sit, where you sit, how much time you spend in front of the computer, that we
Yeah.
didn't have to think about when we were teaching face
Stretching.
to face.
Yeah.
I don't know how your lower back is, but
I find that really interesting what you said about hiding the camera, and it's something that I think I do kind of both things. Sometimes I have it so I can see my camera, and sometimes I have it so I don't. And I actually think there's something to say for either of those, because we do have this rather peculiar thing of sort of, teacher reflection, I've always found it quite interesting to record myself in class and then watch that video and go, oh God, is that what I'm doing? So in sort of real life classes, right? Whereas now with Zoom, you do have this ability to actually just see yourself, doing stuff as you do it. And I do think it's important to kind of limit that because, as you say, it's incredibly unnatural. And most likely, I imagine, if you were doing it all the time, then it's going to develop some strange habits. But it is also quite a good way of being able to see exactly how you're coming across in a
True.
class.
It can also be, it can also put a lot of pressure on you. And because, I kind of think when I go to a classroom and I set up a task and it doesn't work out, no one's going to remember, it's not that big of a deal. But then this might be recorded and I'm actually seeing myself. And I think a lot of teachers do, beat themselves up about this and say, so a reflection, I think, can be kind of like a double-edged sword because we tend to over reflect as well. And because I don't think there is any other profession in the world where every single thing that you do gets feedback and gets evaluated as much as teachers do.
Yeah. That's a good point. Yeah. I mean, especially, the diploma, it's kind of like you're breaking lessons down into like second by second what you're doing, which is, it's really quite ridiculous when you think about it. Yeah.
Yeah. A friend of mine said this, she's a psychologist, and she said, oh, you must have a really hard job because you're always judged. And I thought, you're a psychologist. Surely your job is harder. But then it was interesting.
Well, we're not kind of like, I guess, with the psychologist, where they are the authority. With education, it kind of feels like we are the authority, but people have a room to kind of give feedback to us almost, and it's fluid. It's because it's an interaction and stuff. Go ahead.
Yeah, I had one, which was what do you think about the distraction elements, Anita, that students have? I mean, it's very easy to get distracted, isn't it, now? Because you literally have a distraction device in front of you. And, I have some teenage students and, as I'm teaching them, they just openly, I can hear WhatsApp, like ding, 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 like on their computer speakers coming out. And, I've sort of just accepted that as almost a hazard of the position, because ultimately, if I did mention it or I did sort of crack down on it, well, they can just mute it and still do it. It's not gonna. So what do you think about that kind of stuff?
It's tricky, isn't it? Because even in face-to-face classrooms, are they distracted? Are they paying full attention? I'm not sure. I mean, I have some signs and I can kind of tell, but then who knows what's going on in their head. So we can't be sure that they're fully paying attention either. That's why I try to create participative tasks and do as little of me speaking and as little of me giving knowledge, as opposed to getting them to work and doing it more inductively. They are the ones reaching their conclusions, coming to, let's say, grammar rules or all kinds of things, because then it's harder to freeload.
Yeah, they don't have that space to check the WhatsApp if they're involved with something.
Yeah. But then I think we have to be realistic about this. And, I get distracted. I don't have WhatsApp on during my lessons, but I do think about what I'm going to cook for lunch, or, because we're human and we all have different kinds of ways of being distracted. So, yeah, I think sometimes we need to cut them some slack and say that this is fine as well.
So the lesson that you just kind of referred to being inductive, and can you kind of like walk us through your process on building that? Is it part of a larger curriculum that you have in mind? Is it for a specific topic that you're trying to teach for? Can you kind of let us know your process and of kind of like building a lesson online?
I mean, I always try to think about the best way of exposure to language for that particular group or student. You know, when it comes to grammar or vocab, where is it going to come from? What tools we can be using. So if you're doing a task-based lesson or a course, then what will be, because then again, like you might be using tools like Google Jamboard or something like that, but then you do need to incorporate user training into your lessons as well,
Right.
which is another difficulty, right? Like you can't just say, let's do this task, but let's have a look at Google Jamboard. This is how you add a post-it, that kind of thing. So I think that's an added step into course and lesson planning, thinking about how students will actually access and use
Yeah, you
whatever
can
to use.
you can assume fairly that a student would know how to use pen and paper, but if you want to introduce a different element with tech, you've got to include that and teach those steps, and then it's a case of can you actually communicate those instructions, depending on the language level, if you don't know the L1, right? So so do you find yourself kind of going, what can I do with this student? Because it's kind of like you've got a big sandbox and you can try all these different things, or you could just kind of go, well, I'm just kind of going to stick with what Zoom does and stick in that realm because it's easier. And then whatever lesson I generate, I can just kind of tweak depending on the student's level. How do you negotiate that?
I think it comes down to a thorough needs analysis session that I would do at the beginning of the course or mid-course or any other point during the learning journey, I think. So what I usually do, I do like very thorough needs analysis and norm setting at the beginning and just make note of any ideas for lessons, topics, language areas, skills, all kinds of things that we would need and kind of map it out. So I would have the syllabus first and then think about the technology, because then you can see, okay, this I can do with Zoom. For this one, I would need something extra, like a Google document, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So I think it's easier because that's what we are experts on, right? Like the syllabus, the content, and then anything that's extra. And now we have to learn because of this whole change. I think that's the second step. I wouldn't approach it from the point of view of the tool.
Yeah, well,
but rather the content.
I raise it up because I'm in a conflicted realm right now where if you charge a student online, we're still charging for teaching time, right? We're not charging for teacher prep time. But what you just mentioned, if you're doing learner autonomy, you don't really kind of need to be there per se. I mean, you are there but you're kind of like guiding them along. But the majority of your expertise is going in, is going into preparing the materials. And previously you wouldn't really get paid for that. But yeah, how do we negotiate that? I'm not saying you specifically, but in general, how do we negotiate that? Because if we're building all these new materials and we're doing needs analysis for everyone, myself, if I was doing this face to face, I've kind of got like a bank in my head of lessons that I can do, and I've got over time I've accumulated lots of materials that I can pull from. So I just think of an idea based on the need analysis and then go into a class. But now it's kind of, I'm building up a whole bunch of different things and I'm not getting paid for that. So how does that?
Well, in the long run, the hope is that it will decrease and, preparation time will decrease with all the bank of materials that you're building. And I think this is when, again, teacher communities come to the picture. Like, I don't think we need to reinvent the wheel. If I'm teaching, I don't know, presentation skills to a business professional, I'm not the only teacher doing it out there. and there are loads of teachers teaching similar students with similar needs. So the more we can find ways to share these things with each other, I think the easier our jobs will be, which I think teachers, I only see, English teachers communities from Hungary and Barcelona and Spain in general. But I think we did excel in this, and we do excel in this during pandemic times, that people stick together, help each other out, share materials. I think that's the easiest thing we can do, build these pools of materials and pools of sources
Yeah,
and access them.
a counterpoint to that, though. I mean, I give all my materials away for free. I have a website, Team Teacher China. I built a whole bunch of PowerPoint lessons because you're teaching these 60 plus public school classes. I give them all away for free. However, because I believe in education, however, some people don't do that, and we it's an industry as well. So these materials that you create are actually really useful, but if it's useful, that means some people want it, and if people want it, you could probably charge for that. When you're a teacher as well, they're employing you to teach them because you have something. So how do we balance that? Because if we give all the, it's nice to have a utopian world where we all just kind of give away our materials and we help each other out as teachers. But there are also people, there are also ones out there that have expertise that build materials that rightly should get paid for that. And that we also have companies as well that, build their own materials. So how do we negotiate that? Just thoughts, I guess.
It's tricky, isn't it? Yeah. Sorry.
Well, I was just going to say, just to give my thoughts on that. I think it's probably always been a problem, but now a bit more of a problem, especially now that all preparation is kind of very digital.
Sorry, just to interrupt, because I think of Jamie. And, he had that website, where he's giving away all of his materials, and now he's trying to get his own lesson stream right now. And he's getting some stuff, some money back for his materials, but maybe not as much as he should. But yeah.
Well, I think he's charging kind of a premium, if I remember rightly. So if you want access to his materials, it will cost you, I think, probably the value of, because he makes very, very, very good lessons. Yeah. And it's true, he was giving them all away originally, and I suppose that's the very topic that we're talking about, isn't it? Because he had Lesson Stream, the old one, and he's just making these lessons and giving it away. And as he said, he wasn't even taking an email. So he wasn't even saying, give me your email and I'll give you these lessons. He was just like, here's the lessons. And he did that for like years. And that's how people kind of got to know him and all the rest of it. And now he's kind of changed it, and it's, you can still access the old site, but it's, it's kind of, it's not updated and all the rest of it. And then you've got the new site, which is the premium service. And in a way, probably makes a bit more sense. I mean, it does make a bit more sense to me. I think I would be hesitant to just say, because like I say, I mean, I've got 2 years worth of materials that I've built up now. I'd be quite hesitant to just go like, right, I'll just put all this on the internet, and it's all there. I use Active Inspire, so all the flip charts are there and all of the bits and bobs are there, and any kind of competent teacher would be able to pick up one of those, I think, and sort of run with it, because it does feel like a lot of work's gone into that. So it's an intellectual property issue, really, isn't it, Neil? And it's kind of how you deal with it. So your approach with Team Teacher China is like, here's all the stuff for free, go ahead. But you've kind of built a sort of a subscriber base from that, haven't you? And you've kind of built up a kind of a community on that YouTube channel that you have, that talks about those materials. So there was something there, and I guess that's where. That's where Jamie kind of went wrong with the original lesson stream, that he didn't actually, there was no click the subscribe button and there was no enter your email address. It was just like, just download the materials, right? So it's just an issue of how you kind of, how you ensure that you get, that the effort and time that you've put into something, you get some value for that.
Well, I'm hoping stuff like NFTs and the new kind of blockchain technology can help with that, because I kind of see a lot of teachers, they're self-employed, they're freelancers, they're almost like musicians. We are creating things, and we're creating lessons, and some lessons are very valuable. I mean, I can think of a lot of historical lessons or lessons that teachers have mentioned, and I'm going, this is just an absolutely fantastic lesson. Some of the lessons that Rich kind of hints at when we're on our podcast, where if you were to charge for those lessons, I think he would make a bit of money. I mean, sorry, I'm ranting, but if we can produce books that people charge for our thoughts, well, why can't we just do that with lessons? And yeah.
It's tricky though, because most people are used to stuff being free online, and how do we change consumer behavior in this regard? I don't have the answers, but I think this is going to be even more of a question, or more of an issue, now that markets have opened up. So I'm here based in Barcelona, but if you're in, I don't know, in Munich, you are just as much of a competitor to me. Whereas, before I would have this advantage that I'm actually here and you can come to me and we can meet it in a classroom.
Yeah.
So what is it that's going to differentiate teachers? Well, yes, there's qualifications, but this is one of the things which is part of the package, the service, the materials that you use.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So it is going to be interesting whether people are willing to give this away for free. Whether, I often think about this when people are creating materials, is teachers the best target audience to charge, being one of the lowest paid professions around?
That's a good point.
Because then students are from all kinds of financial backgrounds and with all kinds of paying abilities. So is it actually teachers that we should be charging? It's tricky.
But then
That's
on the flip side of that, it's like, well, then do we make materials that appeal to the more affluent students rather than those that are maybe need our experience more in the sticks of more low third world, I don't know if that's appropriate term, countries. So that is an important part of teaching, and I don't think it's talked about enough, is being paid for it.
Yeah,
appropriately.
We spoke previously, didn't we, Neil, about how there's kind of a paradox of professional development in teaching, which is any good teacher would kind of want to do it, right? It's good for you as a teacher. You get a lot better. I mean, professional development is brilliant. It's very prolific in the English language teaching world as well. It's kind of a buzzword almost, isn't it? CPD. But there are a lot of teachers out there who really are not paid enough to justify, like when someone comes along and says, right, do you want to come to this sort of workshop or conference or whatever, and probably not get paid for your time, because of course you should just be doing it because, it benefits you as a teacher and blah, blah, blah. But, only the kind of top institutions actually pay for that, like the British Council. One of the good things about that institution is they pay you for the time that you spend in CPD, including doing a CPD project, including taking a TILEC or a diploma or something like that. And that's really, I suppose, the way it should be. But, the industry is not built like that. That it's only the very kind of the institutions that are charging the most to their students that can even afford to really do that. So it is a bit of a paradox, isn't it? And it's even more challenging now that, as you've mentioned previously, Neil, we now have all of the kind of the the pool of independent teachers that were previously on their own doing their own thing, who've now come on and might be actually doing quite well in the online world compared to these people who have been teaching for 20 years and have tons and tons and tons of, you know, CPD and teaching experience. And suddenly these two people are competing. You know, it's a strange sort of collision of worlds in a way.
I think this is where co-ops, teacher cooperatives will gain more importance in the future. Like I'm a member of SLB, Surveys Linguistics Barcelona, and you know, groups like this, even if you don't belong to an institution like the British Council, this might be a way of teachers helping each other out and either creating materials together or, you know, just giving professional development to each other. Like what we had in the co-op is us giving CPD sessions to each other, but the person giving a CPD session would get paid, and then the others would get benefits from it too. So, you know, I think this is another way of solving this issue, but it's a lot of work. You need the person who runs the co-op, you need the funds, the tax, the paperwork, all these. So it's really tricky, and not everyone is able to
I
do
could
that.
see something like have you heard of DAOs? That it's a blockchain technology. What is it? Digital autonomous organization. It's kind of like a co-op but it's everyone joins it and you create a vehicle to do something. And it kind of reminds me of what you're talking about, but maybe it might be a way to kind of explore that space. What I'm interested as well, and I don't know if you can touch on this, is like with the Preply, I know Preply has like their proprietary curriculum, I guess, for like new teachers, and then over time you are also allowed with experience to create your own materials for students. Am I off base with that?
No, I mean, I know there are platforms that work this way. Each platform has a different approach to it. At Preply, we don't subscribe teachers what and how they should be doing. So they are given complete freedom as to what they teach and how they teach it. But we do provide materials. At the moment, we have materials for English and Spanish teachers. And we have courses on how to use that, and it's very interactive now because the student has a say in it too. They can be selecting things that they're interested in. So we're trying to show them a way to involve the student in curriculum creation, but it's not prescribed to the teachers.
No, it kind of, I'm just thinking because it harkens back to what we're talking about. You know, like a teacher could create their own material and teach that, but then they could use this bank of material that Preply has and not have to spend that extra time, thus kind of in a way saving themselves money or time that they can use to earn money by teaching more classes. So I'm still stuck on how we balance that, you know, especially as well as you might have people come onto a platform. It might not just be Preply as well, but any platform that does something like this, whereas there are going to be teachers that maybe are creating their own lessons and they're fabulous, but the students prefer to go with the teacher that's kind of a little bit more dynamic or fun, but it's just using the materials that are on offer. And then, but those teachers might just be those that we kind of like think of as like backpack teachers, but online. So how do we deal with this, or do we just kind of let the market decide? Because that's the thing with learners as well. We've touched on it before, is they don't often know what's good for them in a way, in that, you know, like they can take all these corrections but never use them. So, you know, kind of what is, do we let the market decide? But also, what is our role in authority in saying, no, you should learn it this way, versus how much we should just let the students kind of work through it themselves? Because it's weird, right? Because I'm not an authoritarian kind of guy, but as a teacher, we are the we should have a better idea. That's what you're paying us to do, is to help you learn better.
I think in the long run, in the grand scale of things, the market does decide. Because if you're taking lessons and you're feeling that you're not making progress, you might not be able to put your finger on what exactly it is. Oh, it's because there is no spaced repetition in the classes or that kind of thing. Obviously, you won't know that, but you might decide to go on to another teacher. And I think in the long run, these things are decided, but on an individual basis, this is really tricky. And yeah, I mean, the more teachers there are together in like a co-op or a platform like Preply, the more expertise there is. And if there is a way for them to share these things that can benefit everyone, but in the long run, it is the student that makes the decision whether this works for them. And I think I've had this experience that I kind of know what works. And then I talked to a friend, for example, who's taking classes, and she told me about the classes. And I was like, oh, this is really not how you're supposed to be teaching a language, but it works for her.
Yeah.
And she's really enjoying the lessons. She feels that she's making progress. I think she could be making more progress, but who am I to say what's progress and
You're
what
a
she
teacher.
needs?
That's the thing, though. That's the thing,
Yeah,
right?
but not her teacher, and
Yeah,
I
that's
don't
true.
know her exact needs. So
But
I
I guess, like,
think
I'm saying, like, are we talking about? But we should know the needs of the market. Sorry, carry on, please.
no, I think that the market does decide, but maybe on different, like they look at different aspects of teaching. And there is also, how likable the teacher is. Are they giving me jokes? Am I having fun? And then maybe this is also a
But
part of the
for me,
decision.
it's kind of, it self perpetuates bad teaching, or teaching that lacks pedagogy. I'm talking to kind of like Harvard, the Harvards and the Cambridges. They're going to keep selling these lectures, even though we know there's better ways of doing it. Yeah, they're going to keep selling those because that's what the market, the learner expects, and that's what's historically made them money. So why would it change? And
Maybe
that's
people just need to know more about learning. Learners should be more conscious of how best to learn languages and what works best. And maybe we need to find ways for them to make good decisions for their own learning journeys.
yeah.
How to reach them is another question.
Oh, that's what we're trying to do with
Yeah.
this sort of podcast and these sort of discussions, with yourself, Anita. If
Well, that's one of the things I tried to do with my YouTube channel, isn't it? I tried to basically kind of break the fourth wall a bit and give people a sort of an insight into why teachers do the things they do, and break down kind of the inside story on how basically teaching students kind of the things that teachers know about learning languages. And for one reason or another, it wasn't particularly popular because I put a lot of effort into it, and I made some what I consider to be pretty high quality videos. I think you thought they were all
Yeah,
right,
I
Neil,
thought they
there.
were fantastic.
But for one reason or another, either the YouTube algorithm didn't hit home, or students just not particularly that interested in that sort of stuff. Yeah. So
Maybe it's because they expect the teacher to know exactly what's best for them. And that's why I'm paying my teacher. Why would I need to do my extra research into it? I think a lot of times because we get everything on a silver plate, right? Like
yeah,
you go on Amazon, you order whatever. They
yeah,
exactly know what you want before you even clicked on it. So why would I put effort into learning about the
yeah.
best way to learn?
Yeah, I think no one searches for that. I think the videos that do really well are here's 10 ways of saying I'm sorry, or whatever. Like, rather than saying I'm sorry, you say this, or they have the kind of clickbaity title, don't they? Like, don't say I'm sorry, big cross, and then have all these other ways of saying it. And that, those videos get like millions and millions and millions of views from those kind of top channels. But I guess no one's searching for, how languages are learned or whatever. Either that or it's just not coming up in the algorithm.
Okay, I have like a one last question. It's because we're gonna, I guess, start wrapping it up a little bit now. But it's an encompassing one for you, Anita. So you've got a background in marketing, business, teacher development. So what would kind of your advice, steps, or thoughts be about a new teacher comes to you and they want to be a teacher, and they want to be a teacher online, and they also want to make money and make it a career and establish themselves as a business. Could you kind of give us your any sort of ideas on and around that, if you feel that you can?
I would say, in a way, we need to forget about what we thought was the basis of being a teacher, because we kind of thought do a qualification, have a high level of language if you're not, whether you're a native speaker or not, but have the language competency and have the methodological background, and off you go. And it's different now. I think you need a lot of extra skills that you might not have thought of when it comes to branding or creating visually appealing websites, materials, all kinds of things that would support your business. Editing a video, all these extra skills. I think you just need to be willing to learn. Like at the moment, I'm learning about UX design, which I never would have thought would be part of my job, because why would I have ever learned about UX design? But I can see that it's needed for my job, and it makes even my lessons better, because I can see thought processes, I can see what catches the eye, those kinds of things. So just be prepared to learn things that you might not have thought you would have to learn.
Yeah, so
Would
like
be,
a holistic approach.
yeah, I would say. But then the question arises, what you said before, like who's going to pay you for this? Because it's extra work. It's taking a MOOC, it's taking a course, it's taking hours and hours learning online
Well,
for the
that's
same
the
kind of
idea, is
job
it?
in a way.
When you're self-employed, if you have your own business, these are often deductible costs, though, aren't they? So thinking of yourself as not just a teacher but as a business, I think generally is vital going forward, and everything that you need to support that, you have to kind of do that and find ways to either put that into your pricing or find ways to deduct that through tax or business means. So yeah.
And just finding ways to overcome the awkwardness of negotiating price or pricing your services, your lessons, because I think we all have, most teachers have this thing that we're dealing with people, we want to give the best to them. It's kind of a service that we provide, so we really shouldn't be charging that much. And this is such a nice person, I know they are raising 5 kids, that kind of thing. But then you do need to set your price according to what you offer. I think a lot of teachers are also afraid of losing market because they set higher prices and losing students and groups. But then, is it worth it? Think about the hours of work that you will put into it and what comes out of it, or the preparation that you do. So that's another skill that I never would have thought that I would have to learn, like how to communicate that I need to raise my prices, or how to pitch why I am the best person for this corporate job, as opposed to hundreds of other teachers.
Yeah.
That kind of thing.
Yeah, and often in a language that your student might not be fully fluent in, or with that communication barrier, it's a big task. So I've been Neil of Team Teacher fame. If you're looking for more of my materials, have a look at teamteacherchina.com, where you can download and instantly use PowerPoint lessons in your big public school classrooms. We have a YouTube channel, Team Teacher China, where we kind of go through and explain how those materials work. Team Teacher English, where I take those materials and put them into self-study videos, especially for kids, and Team Teacher Baby, where I take my experience and knowledge as a teacher and put that into parenting. And Professor Rich.
You can check me out youtube.com/Professor Rich, twitch.tv/ProfRichGaming, and you can drop me an email at eltunderthecovers@gmail.com if you have something you would like to contribute to the show.
And Anita, thank you very, very much for coming on the show. It's been a wonderful and interesting, fascinating discussion. Please let our audience know how we can get in touch with you and what you're working on.
So at the moment, as I said, I work for Preply, and we're creating webinars and self-study courses for our tutors. So if you're interested in teaching online and you want to belong to a community of teachers and get the support from us in Preply, then feel free to join our platform. You can find me on Twitter and on LinkedIn. It's Derecskei. If you can spell it, then that's amazing. But I think
below.
We might display it. Yeah. So yeah, find me on Twitter and let's continue the conversation, because I think a lot of things that have come up today prove that it's really hard to be an online teacher, and therefore we can help each other out, hopefully, and make it easier.
Fantastic. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. Thank you for coming on the show, Anita.